The sun was barely over the rooftops, and the cul-de-sac shimmered with that golden stillness that only came on quiet weekend mornings. Jake knelt beside his Harley, a soft rag in hand, polishing the chrome until it gleamed like liquid fire. The scent of engine oil and fresh, cut grass hung in the air, blending in a way that always made him feel at home. His bike wasn't just a machine, it was memory, muscle, and art combined. Every bolt had a story, every dent a lesson. He'd rebuilt this Harley from scrap, back when his hands were still rough from service, and his head was full of noise he didn't talk about. The neighborhood was peaceful, but Jake had learned a long time ago that peace was usually temporary, especially in a place ruled by Karen Miller, HOA president, suburban dictator, and a woman whose sense of control stretched as far as her perfectly trimmed hedges. Karen's son, Tyler, was a different kind of problem, spoiled, cocky, and always looking for shortcuts. Jake had caught him before, sneaking around, trying to startle dogs, taking pictures of violations for his mother. A wannabe tough guy who thought the world owed him an easy ride. Jake noticed movement from across the street. The curtain of Karen's window twitched just a little. He smiled. She was watching, as usual, probably noting down that his Harley was too loud for community standards. He let the engine rumble a bit longer than usual, just to remind her it was a free country. Then he shut it off and went back to polishing. The chrome reflected his face, lines around his eyes, silver streaks in his beard, the faint scar above his eyebrow that time hadn't softened. He breathed in the silence, felt it in his bones. Then his phone buzzed. He left the bike idling, trusting the quiet neighborhood, and stepped inside for a second to answer. It was a text from an old buddy, someone from the Corps, checking in, asking when he was going to take that cross-country ride they always talked about. Jake grinned, typed back a quick reply, and poured himself a cup of coffee. He didn't notice the figure stepping into his driveway. Tyler Miller moved like a kid who thought he was invisible. He wore a gray hoodie, the hood pulled up despite the warmth, and cheap sunglasses that reflected his own nervousness more than anything else. He'd been watching Jake's Harley for weeks. The way people at the gas station looked at it, the deep, chest-shaking sound it made when it started. Tyler had always wanted something that made people look at him that way. Today, he decided he'd take it for a spin. Just for a few minutes, he told himself, nobody would know. He glanced around, making sure his mom wasn't watching. The garage door was open, the bike gleaming in the sunlight like a magnet pulling him closer. He swallowed, stepped forward, and wrapped his hands around the handlebars. The metal was warm under his palms, heavy, real. For the first time, he felt power at his fingertips. Okay, he whispered to himself, just a quick ride. He swung his leg over awkwardly, almost tipping the bike before finding his balance. The kicked and scraped the driveway. His heart raced as he twisted the throttle. Nothing. He fumbled for the clutch, tried to remember what his friend had told him about starting a manual transmission. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The Harley shifted slightly under his weight, and that was when he heard it, a tiny, almost polite beep from under the seat. Then the world exploded in sound. The alarm shrieked like a siren, shaking the air. The Harley's custom security system roared to life, not just the alarm, but a recorded voice Jake had programmed himself. Step away from the bike. Tyler froze. His stomach dropped. He scrambled to get off, his sneaker catching the footrest, and the whole machine tilted, heavy and unforgiving. It hit the pavement with a crash that seemed to echo across the whole neighborhood. From across the street, Karen's curtains snapped open. Jake burst through his front door a second later, coffee sloshing onto the porch. His voice was calm, but the edge in it was sharp enough to cut glass. "Kid," he said, walking down the steps. You've got 3 seconds to back away. Tyler turned, eyes wide behind his sunglasses. It's not what it looks like. Oh, it looks exactly like what it is, Jake said, stepping closer. You're trying to steal my Harley. I wasn't gonna steal it. I was just gonna touch it, ride it, drop it. Jake pointed to the scuffed handlebar, the dented mirror. Congratulations, you just bought yourself about $800 in repairs. Tyler's breath hitched. Man, please, 2 seconds, Jake said, his tone dropping low. Tyler stumbled backward, tripping over the curb and nearly falling. He looked over his shoulder at his mother's house. Karen stood frozen at the window, her hand pressed to her mouth. Go, Jake said quietly. Tyler bolted. The sound of his sneakers slapping the pavement echoed between the houses as he disappeared around the corner. Jake stood there for a long moment, breathing through his nose. The Harley lay on its side, engine off, mirror cracked, oil trickling onto the driveway like a thin black tear. He crouched, steady hands lifting the bike upright again. The scratches stung worse than any punch he'd ever taken. He turned off the alarm, silence rushing back in. Birds began to sing again, cautious and uncertain. Jake wiped the oil with his rag and shook his head. Kid's lucky I've mellowed out, he muttered. A voice startled him from behind. Everything all right, Mr. Jacobs. It was his next-door neighbor, Mrs. Flores, holding a watering can and peering nervously over her fence. Yeah, he said, forcing a small smile. Just a misunderstanding. She looked at the bike, at the bent mirror, and raised an eyebrow. Looked more like an attempted theft to me. Maybe, he said, but I think the Universal handled that part. Mrs. Flores nodded slowly, her eyes flicking toward Karen's house. I'm sure it will. Jake gave her a nod of thanks, then turned back to his Harley. He ran a hand along the tank, feeling the familiar hum of metal under his skin. The scratches would buff out. The mirror could be replaced. But what lingered most was the quiet rage curling low in his chest, not at the damage, but at the sheer arrogance of it. He knew Karen would come knocking, she always did, but this time he almost hoped she would. He picked up the fallen rag, wiped his hands, and looked down the empty street. The sunlight had shifted, glinting off the chrome that was still beautiful, still proud, still his. Come on, he murmured to the Harley, almost like it could hear him. Let's get you cleaned up before the real show starts. And somewhere, inside Karen Miller's perfectly painted house, the phone was already in her hand, dialing the police, her voice sharp with outrage and ignorance of the one man she should never have tried to provoke. An hour later, the neighborhood's peace was broken again, this time not by the rumble of Jake's Harley, but by the slow crunch of gravel under the tires of a black and white police cruiser. The sound carried in the still air like a warning bell. Curtains twitched, doors cracked open. In a neighborhood like this, any sign of authority drew an audience fast. Jake was sitting on his porch, a mug of coffee in one hand, a small wrench in the other. He had already replaced the broken mirror on his bike and buffed out most of the scratches. The Harley sat proudly in the driveway again, gleaming as if it had been through battle and come out victorious. Across the street, Karen Miller stood at the end of her driveway with her son beside her. Tyler looked pale, lips pressed tight, a bruise forming on his wrist where he'd probably caught himself when he dropped the bike. His hoodie was gone now. His mother had insisted he change into something presentable before the police arrived. Karen, on the other hand, looked ready for war, hair perfectly sprayed, clipboard in hand, and that sharp, self-righteous expression she wore like armor. As the cruiser stopped in front of Jake's house, Karen marched forward before the officers could even step out. "Officers," she called, voice high and dramatic, "thank goodness you're here. That man assaulted my son." Jake didn't move. He just sipped his coffee, calm as ever, watching the scene unfold like he was at the movies. Two officers stepped out. One was young, probably new, his uniform still crisp and his eyes too eager. The other was older, heavier around the middle, and carried himself with the quiet fatigue of a man who had seen too many ridiculous calls in too many suburbs. The younger one started to speak, but the older officer raised a hand, already scanning the situation. His eyes flicked from Karen's tight expression to Jake's relaxed one, to the Harley gleaming in the sun. "Ma'am," the senior officer said slowly, "what exactly happened here?" Karen took a deep breath, ready for her performance. "My son," she began, gesturing dramatically toward Tyler, was simply admiring that motorcycle when that man, came running out of his house and attacked him. He shouted threats, frightened him, and used language that was entirely inappropriate for this community. Jake tilted his head, fighting back a smirk. The older cop turned to Tyler. "That true, son?" Tyler shuffled his feet. I was just looking at it, yeah." Karen jabbed him in the ribs. "Tell them the rest, Tyler." He swallowed, and then he yelled at me, said I was stealing it or something, but I wasn't. I just touched it. Jake cut in, his voice deep but calm. "Started it, dropped it, and ran when it screamed at him." Karen snapped her head toward Jake. "You admit you have an alarm that shouts at people? That's harassment." Jake chuckled. "Lady, that's called theft prevention." The younger officer opened his mouth, unsure what to say, but the older one was already studying Jake's face. Something about him clicked: the stance, the voice, the calm precision. The officer's eyes narrowed, and then widened slightly with recognition. "Wait a second," he said. "You're Jacobs, right? Colonel Jacobs?" Karen froze. "Colonel what?" Jake nodded slightly, setting his coffee mug down. "Retired, Jacobs." The older officer's entire posture shifted. His tone softened with the kind of respect that came from years of understanding what that title meant. "Sir, I didn't recognize you at first. We got a call about an altercation. Didn't know it was you." Karen blinked, her confidence faltering. "Colonel? What kind of colonel?" "Marine Corps," the officer said. "He's one of the guys who trained half of the tactical division at the academy last year." Tyler's face went white. Jake stood slowly, hands loose at his sides. He didn't need to posture. His calmness was authority enough. "There's no altercation here, officers. The kid tried to take my bike for a joyride, dropped it, scuffed it up. I told him to leave. That's it." Karen recovered quickly, though her voice was shakier now. "That is not what happened. My son is a victim here. That man is threatening us." The older officer sighed. "Ma'am, with all due respect, your son was on his property and sitting on his motorcycle without permission. That's trespassing and attempted theft. That's outrageous," she snapped. "We pay your salaries, young man. You pay taxes, ma'am," the officer said, cutting her off firmly. "That's not the same thing." The younger cop hid a grin behind his hand. Karen's face flushed red, her voice trembling between outrage and fear. "Are you seriously taking his side?" "I'm taking the side of the facts," the officer said. "And the facts say your son got caught doing something stupid." Tyler tried to speak, but Karen silenced him with a glare. "You're supposed to protect this community," she hissed at the officer. Jake stepped down from the porch, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. "You know, officers, I don't want to make this a big deal. The bike's fine now, no harm done. I'd just appreciate it if the HOA president here taught her son to respect other people's property." Karen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The older officer gave Jake a small, knowing smile. "Understood, sir. We'll make a note of the call and close it out as resolved." He turned to Tyler. "Son, I'd suggest you stay away from that bike and that man. You don't want this on your record." Tyler nodded quickly, unable to meet Jake's eyes. Karen was trembling now, her fury boiling over, but trapped under the weight of her own humiliation. "This isn't over," she said, voice tight. "I'll be filing a report with the homeowners board." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Oh, please do. Make sure you include the part where your son dropped a Harley worth more than your annual HOA budget." Even the younger cop snorted at that. Karen turned on her heel, yanking Tyler by the arm. They stormed back toward their house, her voice carrying faintly on the breeze, a shrill mix of scolding and denial. The officers exchanged looks, shaking their heads. The younger one murmured, "Every neighborhood's got one, huh? Every single one." The older cop said, tipping his hat at Jake, "Good to see you again, Colonel. Take care of that bike." "Always do," Jake replied with a nod. As the cruiser pulled away, Jake turned back to the Harley. The sun was lower now, glinting off the chrome like a badge of victory. He crouched beside it, running his hand over the new mirror, listening to the faint echo of the engine's earlier growl in his mind. Across the street, Karen's blinds snapped shut. Jake smiled to himself, stood, and twisted the key in the ignition. The Harley roared to life, deep, proud, unapologetic. The sound filled the street, rolled over the manicured lawns, and lingered in the air like a promise. He revved the throttle once, slow and deliberate, before backing the bike into the garage. "Don't mess with the Harley," he said softly, almost to himself, "or the man who rides it." Then he closed the garage door, the sound of the engine fading into a silence that was no longer peaceful, but triumphant.